This morning's reading is the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, and can be found on page 1041 of the Church Bibles. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord.
Okay. All right, just while the band come down, thank you so much for using worship. Is the headlight working? Or should I go back? Oh, there you go. Wonderful. Sorry, I like to move around when I talk. So, well, it is so good to be here again. I don't know how many of you were here 3 years ago when we were here last. So a few of you. And I have to say, we felt so welcomed by you 3 years ago. And it's interesting to see how God does things in his timing. When we first started a relationship with you, we had no idea you had already a relationship with Ukraine. And for a lot of you, you'd already served in Ukraine. So it's just amazing to see how God orchestrated our beginning of a relationship with you, and then through that, enabling you to continue your relationship with Ukraine. And I thank you so much for what you have done. So just to let you know what will be happening this morning, we'll talk a little bit about the Good Samaritan. It's a really well-known passage, so I'm not sure I'm going to have too much more to share with you. But then I want to share a couple of, I want you to know what's happening in Ukraine and what the church in Ukraine is doing, and how they are being a Good Samaritan to their people around them, and the impact that is actually happening on the people of Ukraine and the gospel in Ukraine. So the story is well known. It's one of the times when someone was trying to catch Jesus out, and we know it was an expert on the law. So actually his questions were a little bit He wasn't wanting to be taught something by Jesus. He was trying to catch Jesus out. And so when he was asked, well, what does the Old Testament say? What does the word say? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with your soul, with your mind, and with all your strength. I don't know how often you guys think about those 4 words. I ponder on those 4 words quite often. I wonder, how much do I really love the Lord with all my heart? Maybe, some days I'm feeling a bit tired, so I'll give you 70%. I don't know about you guys. Your soul, your mind, your thoughts. Sometimes my thoughts run somewhere else, to places they really shouldn't be going. And with all our strength. That is the old commandment. Jesus twice said there are 2 main commandments: love God, and the other one is love your neighbor. And he said, do this, not know this. It's easy to know what we should do, but Jesus was actually saying, do what you know you should do. This is what's important. This is how you gain eternal life, to do. It's not enough just to know. And the expert on the law, he did want to test Jesus, so he asked, well, come on, who's my neighbor? Now, he knew what the answer is. He was an expert on the law. And in the book of Leviticus, it actually talks about who is your neighbor. So the expert of the law was quoting from Leviticus. And it says, do not seek revenge or hear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So this is the word in red there. That's the Hebrew. And it translates as friend, companion, or close associate. It doesn't mean enemy. Doesn't mean stranger. It means friend, companion, or close associates. So that could actually, that's easier to do now, isn't it? Okay, I can love my neighbor. I like my neighbors. Well, maybe you don't, but I like my friends. I chose them because I like them, so I can love them. That's easier to do. However, later in Leviticus, there's another little passage that actually talks about who is your neighbor. And your neighbor living with you must be treated as one of your native born. So your neighbor is not necessarily your neighbor and your friends. It's also strangers in your country, people that aren't from your nationality. And love him as yourself, for you are aliens in Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. So now there's a really clear commandment. We are to love anyone around us. We can't pick and choose. I'm English, I'll love the English people. The commandment is to love everyone that God puts in our path. And that can be a little bit trickier sometimes, can't it? People who God, if I'm put in somebody's path, that's a harder one. It's sometimes a bit hard to love. So I'm thankful that this is here. It means that people are supposed to love me. And so for the teacher of the law, that really ought to have been all he needs. But then again, he's like, well, again, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? And so we have the story of the Good Samaritan. And I'm not going to repeat the story of the Good Samaritan. But we know that first you have the priest and the Levite that walk past the person that needs help. Do we know what a Levite is? It's something like a person who serves in the tabernacle. It could be a worship leader, the warden, someone on the PCC from your scenario. So essentially what we've got is Dave and Barry walking by and saying, not my problem, mate. And when I first, as a child, when I first heard this story, we were asked, well, why do we think the priest walked by? Okay, so I'm actually going to ask you the same question. We'll get the clipboard out here. And I'm going to ask you, there you go, interactive sermons. I don't know if they're more interactive or not, but I like to get people involved. So let's think about this. Why did the priest walk by? What's some of the answers? Oh, okay. Unclean, okay? So actually, the priest knew, if I touch blood, I become unclean. No, I'm the priest. I need to stay clean. That's my religious duty, to keep my hands clean. So that is maybe one good. He was doing what he felt he should do, following his religious rules of the day. Somebody else said something. Yes. Yes, we don't know if the person that was robbed was a Samaritan or not. Probably it was a Hebrew person. But maybe the wrong person, okay? The wrong type of person. Okay. Is that big enough? Can you see that or not? What are some other reasons that the priest maybe and the Levite chose not to help? Too busy. Ah, there you go. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to change this a little bit. We all in our lives have come across people that we could help and we choose not to. In Malvern, I'm not sure you find people who have been beaten and are lying on the streets. But we all come across people that need our help, and we make a decision not to help them. And so what are some of the reasons that we choose not to help people? It's inconvenient. Yes, it's inconvenient. Okay, and thank you for saying that word, because I can't spell it. Inconvenient. My wife, Hanke, is an English teacher, so she's going to tell me later that it was wrong, but they know. Okay, it's inconvenient. Sometimes, I've got other things to do. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't even necessarily like that person, so I'll just close my eyes. I'm talking about myself now, not you. You're all lovely people, I'm sure. What are some other reasons we don't help? Sorry? Oh, we don't know where it's going to take us. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Oh, and we certainly had no idea what was about to happen in our lives when 10 people turned up. That was for sure. Too dangerous. Yep. Oh, and that's the obvious answer with this scenario, because the robbers could still be there, and they could have. Too dangerous. Okay. Maybe two more reasons. Yep. It's somebody else's job to do it. Yeah, somebody else. Somebody else should do it. Okay, and there was one more hand up back there. Yep. Sorry? Okay, I don't know how. And that is actually, that happens a lot. I don't know how. I would like to help. I would like to help, but I don't know how. And some of these are, let's be honest, some of them are relatively good excuses. I used to be a lifeguard, and we were told, you cannot help somebody if it's too dangerous, because then there'll be two of you that need help. And so some of these reasons why we don't sometimes help can be good, legitimate reasons. But sometimes they're not the best reasons, if we're perfectly honest. So honestly, sometimes when I read this story of the Good Samaritan, I'm like, oh, bad priest, bad Levite, without realizing, actually, oftentimes in my life, I'm the priest and the Levite. And I don't always do what I could or should do. So that is something that, we could all be thinking about. Which of these maybe show up more often in our lives why we don't help? Now, there was a study done in 1970, I'm reaching back into ancient history now, in Princeton, and they wanted to know if knowing that you should help makes a difference. And so they did a study with 40 seminarians, so people studying to be vicars, and they took 20 of them, and they asked them to prepare a 15-minute talk on the Good Samaritan, and the other 20 they asked to prepare a talk about how good the school is to some prospective students. And they wondered, if we put someone who needs help in front of these 40 people, would the 20 who are preparing the talk on the Good Samaritan, would they be more likely to respond the way we would expect? So what do you think? Were they more? And then they sent them one by one every 15 minutes, and they said, okay, go out from here, go across the street, through the third door, and that's where you'll find the talk you're supposed to give. So they were sent on their own individually. So what do you think? Was there a difference in who responded, the people who had been preparing a talk on the Good Samaritan, who ought to have it in their minds, I should help? Well, it's a trick question, so the way I'm asking is loaded, isn't it? You would think so. When I read the study, I was like, of course they're going to be more likely to help. They've been reading that they should help. But they didn't. But there was one other factor that actually had a big impact on whether or not someone was likely to help or not. Because they split those 40 people up in one other way. They told a third of them, you're running late. You better hurry up. You just, out the door, turn right, go there. You're late already. Just quick, off you go. They told a third of them, hey, you're on time. Just go out there, off you go, and go left, turn right, turn left. You'll be there on time and you're good to go. And then the final third, they said, you've got all the time in the world. If you leave right now, you're going to be early. You've got plenty of time. And that is what made the difference in who helped or not. So actually, the way it ended up is that the people that were told that they had plenty of time, 63% of them stopped and helped someone that needed help. It was a person lying on the ground, on their path, obviously in pain. The people that were told they were on time, 45% helped. And the people that were running late, only 10% of them helped. And these were people that were going to give a talk about the Good Samaritan. And that's a really interesting way to look at things. How many of us actually have the capacity to help when God asks us to help? How many of us have such hurried lives? Or just looking at, I need to do my thing, that actually, even if we have to step over somebody to do our thing, we do that because our lives are what they are. We don't have the capacity. We're not walking at a pace that gives God the chance to say to us, I have a special plan for you today, this month, this year. And when I read that study, that was really convicting to me because I realized in my life, I oftentimes don't even have the space. God could put someone right in front of me that I need to help. And my excuse is actually, usually, I'm too busy. I sometimes say I don't know how. It's easier. It sounds better to say I don't know how. But oftentimes the actual reason is I'm too busy. I've got other things on my mind. And so that's one of the key things I've gotten out of reading the Good Samaritan over and over again this year is the way I live my life. Do I live it in a way that I allow God, when he has a different plan for me, to actually show me what he should do? And if he shows me what I should do I have the space to actually respond to that in obedience? And then connected with that, the original commandment is love God first. That's a relationship. And so the other thing I've been pondering on recently, especially as we've been helping a lot of Ukrainians, is if my relationship with God is not all it can and should be, then probably some of these excuses will come up more often in my life. So oftentimes, we do things out on our own strength. And that's not what God is asking us to do. He's saying, I can help you here. I have the capacity to help you. And actually, the story with the Samaritan, if you look at the Samaritan, he did take pity. So he was in a place where he could see a need and actually respond to that from his heart. Love God with all your heart. Emotionally, he was probably in a better place than the priests and the Levites were. And then the way he helped was he used what he had. He bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. So the Samaritan obviously had some resources. God had put a need in front of him that he could fulfill. He had apparently bandages on him. Apparently he had oil and wine, and he also had a donkey because he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn. Now, what God did not ask the Samaritan to do is spend the rest of his life caring for this person. Which is actually, one of you said, where is it going to take us? And sometimes when we respond to God's needs that he puts in front of us, it might just be a 2-minute response. In the case of the Samaritan, it was taking him to an inn and then going on his journey and paying for the man to be cared for, but continuing with his life. It's really interesting. It's as he was going. With the Great Commission, it says, in English, we say, go and make disciples. Actually, in the original language, it says, as you are going, make disciples. And oftentimes when God asks us to do something, it's as we are living our own lives. It's very few people that he says, I would like you to do something dramatic to change your life. I got that call to move to the Czech Republic 25 years ago. And actually, I'm really thankful that I said yes to that call. But for most of us, even in my life in the Czech Republic, the command to follow him and obey him is as you are living your life, walk in obedience. And I will give you the resources to do that as you walk alongside me, as you love me with all your heart, mind, and and soul and strength, I will enable you to be used by me in your culture and your society. So go and do likewise. Now, what you could say is, okay, well, Terry, go and do likewise. The next time I'm walking from Jerusalem to Jericho and see somebody on the street, I'll help them. Or, no, that's being facetious. Okay, the next time I see someone on the streets of Malvern, I'll go and help them. But as I said, Malvern seems like a really nice community. I really understand why you live here. But there's different ways that people can be robbed. This man was robbed of everything. He's robbed of his possessions. But there's other ways that people around us are robbed. What are some ways that people can be robbed around us? Not necessarily of, someone doesn't rob your car or your house. But what else are people robbed of in our culture and life today? Sorry? Scams, yep. So there's different scams that will try and take your money, yep, on the internet. Sorry? Yeah, people are robbed of friendship, companionship, and they're lonely. What else are people robbed of today? Security. A lot of people live in fear these days. They live in fear. What else do we feel robbed of? Innocence. Robbed of our innocence, yes. Ukrainians would say that they're being robbed of their country right now, or their homes. What are some other things that we're robbed of? Relationships. And sometimes, Satan is the father of lies, and he creates lies in our lives that rob us of those relationships and friendships. And I would say in our cultures today, we're oftentimes, and someone alluded to that, we're robbed of hope. All around us, we see people who are robbed of hope because they've not heard that they are loved. They've not heard that they can have a relationship with the Heavenly Father that loves them, or they've not experienced it. And so that's one of the maybe interpretation we can see today. What Jesus wasn't saying to the people necessarily is go and help people lying on the street. But loving your neighbor, loving people who have been robbed, looks very different for each and every one of us. And I'm sure if we just sit now for a couple of minutes and think, who do I know around me that has been robbed of something? God would be able to put to mind ways in which we can be messengers of hope. And at the end, maybe I'll give you some time to do that. But before I end, I would like to share with you some stories of some great Good Samaritans in Ukraine. And you saw this photo already. This man in the van at the back, his name is Sergei. He's a pastor of a church in Kharkiv. And his wife was one of the first refugees that ended up in our living room. She was the shepherd of those 10 people, but he stayed behind to be serving his community. And from the day the war started, Sergei has been going into the war zone to bring people out and to take humanitarian resources in. And he's just one of many, many, many people from Ukrainian churches that have served Ukraine at this time and been messengers of hope at this time. We know that organizations like the Red Cross and the UN have been taking humanitarian aid in. What you don't know maybe is that they don't go where it's dangerous. But who does go where it's dangerous? It's the church. It has been the church that has been going where the bombs are landing to pull people out and to take people food and resources to help them. And Sergei is just one of those people. And he's doing that Monday to Friday, but what's he doing on Sunday? He's preaching the gospel. His understanding of the Good Samaritan isn't that I've now become a full-time humanitarian worker. I am a pastor. I have a flock to shepherd still. So during the week, I will be saving people literally, but on Sunday, I'm still standing in my pulpit and sharing the word. And actually last month they restarted their youth ministry with teenagers that are still living in Kharkiv. And that's something that's really amazing to me, that the church in Ukraine has not forgotten why it exists. It's being the hands and feet of Jesus, but it's also still sharing the good news in a very practical, but also preaching the word as well. So that Sergei, he came over to visit. He brought some Ukrainians to go to one of our camps, and we sent him back with a van full of food that he could then distribute to places where people had no food. This is Ihor. So Ihor and I have known each other for a long, long time. He's a pastor of a church in Lviv. Lviv is in western Ukraine. It's a relatively safe place. It is a safe place. And overnight, their church building, it's about the same size as your church, became a refugee center. Overnight, their church would have 150 people sleeping on their floor as soon as the war started. And that was part of the pathway to get people to the West. Not only was his church full of refugees, but his home was full of refugees. He would go to the train station at 2 or 3 in the morning to find old people or small children who are waiting for trains or just arrived on trains and say, come to my home, my wife will give you borscht, and you'll have a safe place to live. Any which way he could help, he's been doing that. And this photo is, he sent me an email one day saying, the Russians are now bombing petrol stations near the war zone. So whenever anyone goes nearer to the war zone with supplies, we have to take extra petrol cans because we can't get petrol anymore near the war zone. But there's no way that we can buy petrol cans in Ukraine anymore. They're all gone. And so we were able, as a popular question, how many petrol cans can you get into a Skoda Octavia? Anyone want to know? The answer is 50. So that's just one small way in which Ihor is serving. And his whole church, and not only him, but members of his church regularly drive to the front lines with resources, supplies to take humanitarian aid in, a lot of medical supplies, and bring people out. There were some more photos there, but okay, that's a hint that maybe I should stop. Did the other photos get there? Okay, there were a couple of other photos I wanted to show you of, I was in Ukraine in March, and a team of youth workers. And they're also people that have normal jobs, and they're still doing youth ministry, still sharing the gospel with young people that need hope right now, as well as caring for their own families and their own children. It is amazing what the church is doing, not only in Ukraine, but across Poland, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, and Czech Republic. A friend of mine from Poland, he's a pastor, said, finally the church is becoming what we always hoped it would be. It's just a shame it took the war to make that happen. So I want you to know that yes, there is immense pain and suffering happening right now. But there's a renewal happening right now as well. Churches in Ukraine have never been as full as they are now. And the reason why is all of these good Samaritans are loving God and loving their neighbor, and people that would never have gone to church are seeing that, and they're saying, how is it that you're able to do this for us, for people that you don't know? So be proud and blessed to be a part of what is happening in Ukraine in a good way. The church there is doing amazing work, and it's being done by people like you who can pray for the pastors in Ukraine and support them and what they're doing. I know that some of you have also given to our organization, and the money that you give, we turn into humanitarian aid and we send on into Ukraine. So thank you for being a part of what you're doing. And I did want you to know there's a lot of hope happening in Ukraine right now as well. A lot of pain, but a lot of hope, because the church in Ukraine is being a messenger of hope. Where we do what we're commanded to do, it's unimaginable how God blesses that in ways that we'll never understand. And that's where I'd like us to end. Messengers of hope. There are people around you that have been robbed of something. It could be security, it could be finances, but definitely of hope. And are there people around you where God is not asking you to change your whole life to respond to their need, but it is asking you to see their need, put them on a donkey, help them get themselves back together again as you are going on your life. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to pray about that. Lord, how can we be good Samaritans to the people around us? Is there something more that you want for us to do? And as we do that, we understand that we can do that through your strength. It's not our strength. You're not asking us to destroy our lives to help people around us. You're asking us to join you in the work that you're doing with the people around you. And I pray that you would help us to keep our eyes open for how we can do that here in Malvern and wherever else we see a need globally. In your name I pray. Amen.